Welcome, everyone. I want to thank all of you for coming to this lecture series, which was created in honor of my husband, Will Miller, a social justice activist and professor of philosophy who taught at UVM for 35 years. Welcome to this 41st anniversary of the first Earth Day event. I want to thank the board of the lecture series for their work in helping to determine topics for these lectures and for their help in finding speakers who are current on the issues that Will would have wanted us to be discussing. Our current board members include Ann Peterman, Helen Scott, Fred Magdoff, Mike Cassidy, Colin Robinson, and myself. We have many co-sponsors for this event, and they include the Vermont Student Environmental Program, which helped procure this room for the event, the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources, UVM's Recycling Program, the UVM Environmental Program, the Department of Plant and Soil Sciences, the UVM English Department, and the James and Mary Brigham Buckham Foundation, the Global Justice Ecology Project, the Will Miller Green Mountain Veterans for Peace, and the Burlington chapter of the International Socialist Organization. Thank you to all of you. I also want to thank those of you who recently made donations to the lecture series. You help us continue to bring important topics to consider and impressive political speakers into our community. I encourage those of you here tonight to make donations as well. Without your generous support, we could not do this work. A few containers will be passed around for this purpose, and clipboards will also be passed around so we can collect your names and addresses in order to keep you informed about our work and the work of other progressive organizations which we support. As our logo for this lecture series says, Will always be remembered as a clear voice in a world of false words and disinformation. Our mission, which Will helped to construct, brings speakers to the UVM campus and to the Burlington community to provide a continuing program of radical analysis of social, ecological, and political concerns. Will was an amazing social justice activist. When he spoke, we listened. We were incredibly lucky to have him in our lives for as long as we did. As we say in our mission statement, Will set a courageous example in speaking truth to power. His voice was powerful, especially in encouraging other voices to speak up and be heard. He had an unwavering commitment to the struggle against war and for social justice, and he had an amazing ability to move others into action. He would be so incredibly proud of the faculty members and students who are continuing to speak out in the name of social justice, both on and off campus. Will offered reasoned and insightful analyses into the origins and workings of capitalism and imperialism, giving us both a call and a vision, a call to struggle and a vision of a more just society, a society where all work is valued, where truth is not silenced but nurtured, where all are treated as equals, that is at peace with itself, and in which neither people nor resources are exploited. A few lectures ago, I began the tradition of reading the following poem by Howard Zinn, another inspiring and extraordinary social justice activist, author, and university professor. It offers us inspiration in trying times. On Getting Along in Difficult Times by Howard Zinn. You ask how I managed to stay involved and remain seemingly happy and adjusted to this awful world where the efforts of caring people in comparison to those who have power? It's easy. First, don't let those who have power intimidate you. No matter how much power they have, they cannot prevent you from living your life, speaking your mind, thinking independently, having relationships with people as you like. Read Emma Goldman's autobiography, Living My Life. Harassed, even imprisoned by authority, she insisted on living her life, speaking out, however she felt. Second, find companions who have your values, your commitments, but who also have a sense of humor. That combination is a necessity. Third, notice how precise is my advice that I can confidently number it, the way scientists number things. Understand, the major media will not tell you of all the acts of resistance that take place every day, the strikes, protests, the individual acts of courage in the face of authority. Look, and you will certainly find it, for evidence of these unreported acts. And for the little you find, extrapolate from that and assume there must be 1,000 times as much as what you've found. Fourth, note that throughout history, people have felt powerless before authority, but that at certain times, these powerless people, by organizing, acting, risking, persisting, have created enough power to change the world around them, even if only a little or briefly. Fifth, remember those who have power and who seem invulnerable are in fact quite vulnerable. Their power depends on the obedience of others, and when those others begin withholding that obedience, begin defying authority, that power at the top turns out to be very fragile. Generals become powerless when their soldiers refuse to fight. Industrialists become powerless when their workers leave their jobs or occupy the factories. Sixth, when we forget the fragility of power imposed from above, we become astounded when it crumbles in the face of rebellion. We have had many such surprises in our time, both in the United States and in other countries. Seventh, don't look for a moment of total triumph. See it as an ongoing struggle with victories and defeats, but consciousness of people growing over the long run. So you need patience, persistence, and you need to understand that even when you don't win, there is fun and fulfillment in the fact that you have been involved with other good people in something worthwhile. Okay, 7 pieces of profound advice should be enough. Howard Zinn. So that concludes my part. Following me, Dan Goosen, a friend and former student of Will's, will say a few words about him, and then Fred Magdoff will introduce our speaker, Heather Rogers. Thank you again for coming to our lecture series.
So it was 6 years ago this March that we lost our dear friend Will, and I first met Will about 11 years ago as a student at UVM, and while I was always interested in social justice issues, meeting Will was really a turning point in my life, and I think it probably was for many of the other people in this room. Like many of the hundreds and thousands of students whose lives he touched over the years, 35 years as a professor of philosophy here at the university, I was transformed from a casual observer into somebody who suddenly began to wonder not only what was going on in the world, but why it was happening, and what the historical context was, and what I could do about it. For this, I have Will to thank. I stopped spending time worrying about uninteresting prerequisites and GPA and started figuring out how to spend more time with Will Miller. For simply being in his presence, one couldn't help but feel some of his wisdom and encyclopedic knowledge sink into you. First, as our faculty advisor to SPARC, the Student Political Awareness and Responsibility Coalition, and later as my professor of Marxism, arguably one of the most popular courses ever offered at UVM, I was witness to Will's inspirational qualities as a deeply passionate and committed scholar, teacher, and activist. In a world full of injustice, oppression, and misinformation, Will was an unending source of truth, compassion, and optimism. Whether explaining the inevitable downfall of capitalism, accompanying yet another student march to the Waterman Building, sometimes to occupy, sometimes just to create a ruckus, or driving from Westford through a snowstorm to help lay the groundwork for yet another bus trip to Washington, D.C. for a demonstration, or volunteering to represent the anti-imperialist argument in yet another debate, Will would always give, and give some more. With his vast amounts of experience and knowledge, his huge heart and accompanying smile, Will was the kind of guy you always wanted to be around. Knowing Will has made me a better person. The lessons and information I gained from his teaching and example will always be a part of who I am. And we lost a great soul with his passing 6 years ago. But I'm comforted knowing that I'm just one of literally thousands of people who carry a piece of Will with him. And I know many of them are here and carry that. His gifts of justice, wisdom, and passion will continue to keep giving Will into the future. This lecture series is one such example of that, and thanks to Anne and the board for putting it together and keeping it going and keeping Will's legacy moving forward. Thank you, Will.
It's an absolute pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, who I met just a little over a year ago in New York City at a conference. And after hearing her speak, I went home and bought her 2 books that she had written and read them and found them absolutely fascinating. One of them is Gone Tomorrow, The Hidden Life of Garbage, The History of Garbage. You wouldn't believe how interesting that issue is. And the other is the topic of tonight's talk, which is Green Gone Wrong, How Our Economy is Undermining the Environmental Revolution. Unfortunately, I think all the copies that were here have already been sold, if I'm not mistaken. We made a mistake in not having more books of hers. Heather Rogers is an author, a filmmaker, an investigative reporter whose work has appeared in many different venues, such as the New York Times, Mother Jones, and The Nation. She has written these 2 books over the last several years. And for this last book, Green Gone Wrong, Heather really traveled all over the world to actually look at projects that were going on from the United States to South America to Asia. So she brings a real feel and knowledge of actual events as opposed to sort of armchair type of philosophizing or thinking about the subject. I just wanted to, before having her speak, since so many people here know Bill McKibben because of his Vermont connection as well as what he's doing, there's a blurb on Heather's book, Green Gone Wrong, from Bill, and it says, Heather Rogers reminds us with vivid examples that there's no way we can just subcontract our environmental conscience to the new breed of green marketers. And that really is a major theme that you'll be hearing tonight. My own feeling, I know there are people here from the environmental program, my own feeling is that, both books, but especially Green Gone Wrong should be required reading, and for anybody in the environmental studies area, anyone who's really interested in the environment and what we can do about it and what kind of things are done that really have very little influence or actually may be harmful, though we think we're doing good by it. So you have a treat in store for you tonight, and it's with this absolute pleasure that I introduce Heather Rogers.
Okay.
People need seats. There are more seats on the side of the room.
Yeah, there's kind of
down here too.
peppered in there. Let people get settled. Evidently, there's some seats over here too. There's in the middle there. Fred, thank you for the nice introduction, and thanks to you, Anne, and to Dan. It was great to hear more about Will. I've read about him, but it was nice to hear what you guys had to say. And thanks a lot to the Institute for bringing me. I'm really honored to be here. I have wanted to come, since the book came out, I've wanted to come to Vermont because I think you people will get what I'm talking about. So I really look forward to the conversation that we'll have afterwards, which will, I'll talk for a while and then we'll open it up and have a discussion. So please be thinking of good questions and things to say. My expectations are high. So I just want to start out by saying that, so take out your smartphones and get this book. This is what it looks like. I wrote this book. It grew out of my first book about garbage. I wrote it because I was going around doing talks about, garbage and disposability and how deeply embedded consumerism is in our culture and the way that we see ourselves. And almost everywhere I spoke, I went all over the United States, I went to Canada, I went to the UK, and almost everywhere, at least one person said, yeah, but if we just buy the right products, won't everything work out? If we eat organic food and drive hybrid cars, that'll do the trick, right? And so Green Gone Wrong is very much a response to that. It's an attempt to unpack what that means. What would that look like if we do this? And in fact, these things are being implemented more and more. So what does that stuff really mean? And what I'm talking about tonight is, and this is one of the main themes of the book, is what's the difference between false solutions and real solutions? Because that's something that I think we really need to be able to differentiate between those things if we're really going to solve the problems that we face, and also if we're going to create a world that we want to live in. So it's a crucial step. So the idea is, basically keeping the larger system intact. And what we'll do is we'll just sort of swap dirty products for green ones. And if we all demand green products, that will force a transformation of the economic system from a dirty one into a green one. We'll have a green economy. This is the logic that's used. And so basically, we're all going to eat Oreos, so we may as well eat organic Oreos. That's sort of that sounds good. We'll get our ingredients from organic farms, and we'll get our organic sugar from organic plantation, and that will force all these farmers to start farming organically, and that should do it. And what I wanted to know when I was writing this was, what does it really mean if we do that? What does it really mean if we decide to all eat organic? The United States has only 7% of the world's organic cropland. So clearly we can't grow all of the organic food that we need in the United States. We have to source outside of the United States. As companies like General Mills and retailers like Walmart get in on the organic trade, there's this scaling up that has to happen. There's a consistency and a uniformity in the supply of organic crops that needs to be there. So what does that look like? What happens? What are the social and environmental and economic impacts of that in real places? Those are so often obscured from our view when we're in the grocery store, looking at a product with the stamp, the organic stamp. So I looked at the impacts as Fred mentioned, I traveled around the world. I looked at the impacts in the United States. I spent some time on small, local, beyond organic farms in upstate New York. And then I also went to South America. I went to India. I went to Indonesia. And I also went to Germany. And I'll touch on these various stories. But I looked at food, shelter, and transportation just to get a kind of overview of these different initiatives and practices. Some are more advanced than others, like organic food and farming, biofuels. And some are less so. I went to an eco-community in Germany, which I'll talk about. So in doing this, I just wanted to unpack this and to really see what we've gotten ourselves into and what the possibilities are. And this is I went to South America to look at large-scale organic farming. This is Paraguay, and which is right in the middle of South America. And this Paraguay is the #1 producer of organic sugar globally. Okay, who knew? And I went to a plantation there called Azucarera Paraguaya, and it's the #1 organic sugar producer in the country, and they supply 1/3 of all the organic sugar consumed in the United States, this one plantation and mill. And they are, a company named Wholesome Sweeteners imports their, he looks like he knows that name. Anyway, Wholesome Sweeteners imports the sugar, and now you're blushing. They bring in this organic sugar, sell it on the shelves of Whole Foods under the brand name Wholesome Sweeteners. And I had no idea when I was down there. I was like, oh, that's the organic sugar I have on my shelf. And now you'll find out where it comes from. They also sell to General Mills and to companies like Silk that makes the Silk soy milk. So their sugar crystals really course through the American food system, the organic food system. So just a couple other things. We have conceptions about what sustainability is, about what organic means, and these are really unique cultural conceptions. So when we talk about environmental crisis, and when we talk about solutions to environmental crisis, I think it's important to just point out that these are really specific cultural references. And when I was in some of these countries, in Paraguay, I talked to farmers about organic, and they were like, "What are you talking about?" They eat and grow organic. That's just what they do, but they don't call it organic. That's just food. So I think it's important to remind ourselves of that. In my book, I say, organic is a category that has been created by countries that have kind of destroyed their own capacity for holistically raising food. So basically, I'm going to go ahead and I just want to run through a couple things. I never use notes, and I thought I would use notes, and it's totally distracting, so I'm going to stop using them. I was like, I'll just try it and see. But anyway, so there's a couple things. There's like organic food. I'm just going to harp on it a little bit more. But organic food, the sales in organic food have grown by double digits every year, except for last year, for the last 15 years. So here's an example of like kind of the market working. You have biofuels in full production, corn ethanol in the United States, and biodiesel. Consumption of biodiesel in Europe was set to triple by 2010. I haven't actually seen the latest numbers, but just huge increases in the amount of biofuels being manufactured and refined and consumed. And then carbon offsetting. This is another kind of growth area. Does anybody who knows what carbon offsetting is? So a fair number. So I'll just explain it when I get to that part of the talk. But basically, I'll explain it now. So it's basically like, say you take a flight and you want to offset, you want to neutralize the carbon emissions from your flight. What you can do, there's often now airlines will offer, if you want to balance out the carbon emissions from your travel, click this button. It'll send you to an offsetting company website, and then you contribute $10 or $20, and your money gets pooled with other people's money, and all of that goes into some like a tree planting project or building a carbon neutral power plant that's meant to, you make these emissions here, and then we absorb them over here, or we don't emit them over here, and it all evens out. So carbon offsetting is something that is also just growing rapidly. Carbon trading and carbon offsetting are now worth $30 billion a year, this industry, globally. So there's there's real momentum behind these market-based solutions. And so just to give you a sense of what it's like on the ground. So this is Paraguay. This is the Upper Paraná Atlantic forest. It's a subtropical forest. And it's like the most biodiverse forest you've never heard of. There's over 500 species of birds. It has, a tremendous array of flora. And here's an image of the. This is where I just walked through, but it's there's cacti, there's palm trees, there's ginger growing on the ground, there's this hardwood tree, lapacho, and there's water systems that run throughout the place in eastern Paraguay where I was, and underneath the farms in the region I was in is the Guarani aquifer, which is the largest freshwater aquifer in South America, and it's huge, and it's globally a really important source of water. So the farming practices there impact that aquifer. So Azucarera paraguaya is, because there's this huge demand for organic, Azucarera paraguaya has decided to get more involved in the organic business. It's more profitable than conventional farming, and it's a growth industry. So what they're doing is they grow conventionally. Instead of converting their conventional crops into organic crops, they're just creating new cropland to grow organically. And the way they're doing that is they're clear-cutting the native forests. So you can see on the left is that's the new organic cropland, and on the right is the forest. And then there's some cows grazing in the foreground, and there's some of the land is cleared, and then cows graze on it for a couple years, and then they shift it to farmland. But it's hard to know exactly the process they go through. They didn't really want to talk about it, which was weird. I'm kidding. So anyway, that's not what people have in mind when they look for the organic seal on the food they buy. And I think you guys are a more sophisticated audience, and you're a more sophisticated set of consumers than a lot of other people. But this is, I think, really not what people imagine is going on. This is a village in Indonesia, on the island of Borneo in the rainforest. The village is called Pare, and it took like a long truck ride, a boat ride, and a long motorcycle ride to get there, just to give you a sense of how remote it is. And it's a indigenous Dayak village. There's about 60 families, and it's right on the edge of a river. And the people who live there are, they hunt and gather in the forest. They grow crops within the forest. They grow rice and cassava and pumpkin. And they also plant rubber trees, and they harvest the rubber. And this is what it looks like there. This is the head of the village, Momonus, and his wife Margareta, with one of hundreds of papers that were part of their efforts to stop the deforestation that's going on. And what's happening is in Indonesia, a huge amount of rainforest is being cleared, and peatland forest is being cleared to expand cropland to grow oil palm trees to make palm oil. And palm oil is increasingly used to make biodiesel. So this community in Pare, happened upon these chainsaw crews, and that's how they realized that their forest was being taken down. And since then, it's been about, I don't remember exactly the dates, but it's been several years. They've been fighting. They've gone through all the right channels as stakeholders, like they're stakeholders. And, they've gone to the local authorities, the regional authorities, eventually the national government, and not to mention directly addressing the company, and they get nothing. They get absolutely nothing. And basically, just a quick rundown on deforestation in Indonesia. Generally, deforestation accounts for 20% of all global CO2 emissions, and Indonesia is the world's third largest CO2 emitter because of deforestation, which is primarily driven by the clearing of forests for oil palm plantations. So it's like a big deal, And the idea that we would be making some kind of like green carbon neutral fuel from it is clearly insane. And so anyway, so these guys are experiencing the social impacts of it and also the environmental impacts from a different perspective. So they've tried to fight this, and they've been unsuccessful. So I'm just going to tell the story really quickly. I was in Momanus and Margaretta's. We stayed there in the village, and the night that I got there, he had called all these village men to a meeting, and they told me this whole story. And these people, no furniture, like Momanus can read, but not all of them can read. And we're in the meeting, and after 3 hours or something, Momanus asks if anyone knows what's going on this area that's been deforested. Has anybody been out there lately? And one guy raises his hand and he says, yeah, I was out there the other day and the deforestation has stopped. And so we woke up the next morning, and Momanus and a couple other guys from the village took me out there to show me. And this is what it looks like. So the intact forest, and then the clear-cut and burned forest. So we're tooling along, and we come across an illegal chainsaw crew. These guys are not from the villages. They're from other places, and they're incredibly, incredibly poor. And I thought they were going to freak out when they saw us, and I had a camera and a video camera, and I'm white, and like they just, I mean, it was just, they're just doing a job. And and I got the sense also that they didn't, there was just they didn't feel scared or guilty, or, they're just getting paid to do this thing. Anyway, you could hear chainsaws coming from the forest beyond where we could see, and so Momanus went back there. 10 minutes later, he comes back, get on the bikes, we have to get the hell out of here. We do, and I can see this guy coming up on a newer white motorcycle, and we leave. So we get to a stopping point. Just give you more of a sense of what the landscape looks like. We get to a stopping point, and Momanus tells me what happened. The guy on the white motorcycle was the guy from the meeting the night before who said he'd been to the edge of the forest and nothing was happening. So he lives in Pare, and he's Margaretta's brother. He's Momanus's brother-in-law. So it's just like a snapshot of how this happens. The NGOs call it horizontal conflict, but it's just this kind of breaking apart of communities as a way of breaking apart the forest, basically. Okay, I'm going to spend a little time on carbon offsetting because I think it's an important story in terms of, I know that I was speaking with some folks earlier tonight about this whole issue of carbon, containing carbon emissions, neutralizing them. What are different ways of doing that? And so I think a lot of people, I know there's a lot going on in Burlington right now with that fuzzy company, Lockheed Martin. So we'll talk about that later. But so carbon offsetting, as I explained before, is something that individuals, we can buy offsets. Also, the Democratic Party loves offsets. They offset their last convention. Al Gore offsets, and he offset his movie, which cost about $178 or something like that. It was an incredibly small amount of money, I thought, for all that flying around. But anyway, so say you want to offset your carbon emissions, you go to a site like this. My Climate is very well respected. It's based in Switzerland, and there's this little G, you can see like a yellow with a pink symbol, and that's the gold standard, which is like, primo certification. This is a great carbon offsetting project. That's like the best you can get. So you're going through and you're like, okay, I want to put my money into something that's really good. Okay, it's got the gold standard. I'm going to go for this. And you see a picture of these people who clearly need something. They need something good in their lives. But I just want to read. I don't know if I can read it from here. Can I? Do you need me to be like?
I think you've got to be connected to be able
Oh, this is not going to work. Okay. This part will just... Okay, so basically it says, through technological innovation, we've been able to use biomass, which is what they call crop waste and organic matter that's left after harvest. So what they've done is they built a power plant, a carbon neutral power plant, and what it does, it's a biomass plant. So it burns organic material, rice straw, sugarcane leaves, dead palm fronds, this type of thing. And it's in a small farming area in southern India in the state of Karnataka. And the idea is that they'll take these crop wastes and put them through this power plant where they burn the waste and generate electricity for the surrounding villages. And they'll do that instead of building a coal-fired power plant. So they're not creating the emissions that would have otherwise been created. So there's your carbon neutralization. But I want to read this bit that's at the bottom of this. So this has led to a revolution in the little developed region of Karnataka in India. Biomass, which has previously been burned as waste on the field, suddenly has value and increases the income of the local farmers. I'm sorry, that's not what. Oh wait, there it is. Okay, this waste is no longer being burned or left rotting on the field, where it has for a long time polluted the environment and released greenhouse gases. I just love that. Thank God somebody solved that problem. Anyway, so this is another town called Hegur, and this is just near to this power plant. And I went there because I just wanted to see, okay, what is one of these projects like? What actually happens? And it turns out these are not the easiest things to find. They'll say, it's in Karnataka, which is a giant state in southern India. And you go there and you start talking to people, and you immediately get the line. So I learned that I had to figure out how to get people in their houses so that they would actually just talk openly. So that took some time. But what I found was that basically there's a couple things that are going on. If we could offset our carbon emissions by neutralizing them in this way, if it actually worked, maybe it would. It sounds good. It sounds great. But there's so many implications. It's so much more complicated than that. Socially, in terms of people's daily lives, what are these materials? They're not pollution. They don't pollute. They are used in all kinds of ways. This is just an image of the cropland. Rice, sugar, and coconut palm trees are the main crops there. This is a couple farmers that I met, and we had coconut water together. It was really delicious. These are some sugarcane cutters, and these they work for, the women earn $1.50 a day, the men earn $2 a day. And most of the people in this region are landless peasants. So most of them, if they work, this is the kind of work they do. And here's just a couple more. You get a sense of a little bit of who these people are. Younger people, older people, women, men. Actually, the women were working really hard, and the men were sitting down, eating a lot. Just happened to notice that. Here is the sugarcane leaves, and this is the type of material that will go to, and this is the power plant. So you can see there's a sort of berm here of the dead plant matter. Here's a closer picture of it. Okay, so this stuff is part of the culture in a way. And these people by no means see this as waste. Here you can see where the sugarcane leaves and also palm fronds are used to make shelter. And these are the most destitute people in the region. that have to live this way, but they use these materials constantly. This is a couple in Higur who I met who are silk farmers, and they use the sugarcane leaves to weave these screens where they grow. Those are the worms. They're crazy. And this is the kind of process. I'd never seen it before. And so again, these materials are really fundamental to economic and in their daily lives. This is Amma, who was kind of my main host in Higur, and she's cooking, and it's so dark because the electricity kept going out. And this is the thing, right? So the electricity is supposed to provide power to the surrounding villages. What happens is the electricity actually just goes straight into the grid. So their supply of energy hasn't improved since this power plant went in. So you can see what she looks like with the flash. You can also see she's making a fire, and the people in the region make fires multiple times a day for cooking and washing, and they use these materials for making fires for themselves. And what's happening is that they're having to buy firewood now. So not only is that creating an economic burden on them, it's also creating an incentive for people to cut trees down to sell as firewood, which I saw in many places. So you have this kind of impact. You also have farmers who are taking this material off the farm, breaking that closed loop cycle, and they're having to buy fertilizer. So there's all these kinds of economic implications and changes in the way that people live, and now as more people have to buy firewood and fertilizer, it just really starts to change the economic equation. And those things are not clear when you look at that page on that website for My Climate. None of that stuff is apparent. And a really important point about carbon offsetting is that when you have a system like this, the only way that you can get the offset money is the project that you're doing has to be what's called additional. So it can't have already been planned or funded. It has to be additional to what would have otherwise happened. And what that means, what that does is it creates a disincentive for countries like India and China to come up with comprehensive renewable energy plans and programs, and to create a real green energy infrastructure. It discourages them from doing that because if they do, they won't be eligible for carbon offset money. And we're talking billions and billions of dollars a year. Why would they give that up? So I just think that's a really important point. And if India starts requiring its states to build a certain number of solar panel, install a certain number of solar panels or build a certain capacity for wind power, that type of thing, they'll lose out their carbon money. They'll lose it out to China, that's the type of there's this kind of competition for that money going on. This is the headquarters of Ford. I went to Detroit, another developing country, and we wouldn't even have to think about this whole idea of carbon offsetting if we weren't emitting as much carbon. And one of the the main carbon emitter is coal-fired power plants in the United States. About 50% of all carbon emissions come from coal. I think that's right. But it's the #1 source of CO2 emissions in the U.S. Right after that is vehicles. So that's why I went to Detroit. And I went to Ford. I was there in winter. And so you can't see the green roof on Ford's factory, which was designed by that guy, William McDonough, that eco-architect, cradle-to-cradle guy. So, but you can see here, I'm in the tourist center, and you can see how there's these raised skylights, and underneath the snow is a green roof of sedum. And and basically, they're doing all these things to try to, green themselves in the process and all that. But what they make in that factory is the Ford F-150 truck, which is one of the least fuel-efficient cars on the road. And, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, but the Model T, the first Model T, which was in 1909, definitely by 1913, it was getting 26 miles to the gallon. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? The F-150 does not get 26 miles to the gallon. It's their most profitable car. Just quickly, okay, why do they prefer these cars? Why do they prefer gas guzzlers? Well, they'll say, well, we make them because people buy them. And I argue, yeah, people do buy them. People do want them. Where those desires come from, is like something we could spend a lot of time talking about in terms of public relations and marketing and cultivating desire. But also, manufacturers have needs. And that's something that does not get talked about very often. And the needs that any corporation has are to make profits. And so companies like Ford, of course, General Motors, Chrysler, they want the big cars because those cars are more profitable. And they happen to be gas guzzlers. I don't think that they want them because they're gas guzzlers. I think they want them. They want people to buy them. They want to make them because they're so much more profitable. Profits on an F-150 are in the thousands of dollars. Same with an SUV, thousands of dollars per car. With a small, more fuel-efficient vehicle, profits will be in the hundreds of dollars, and sometimes those cars are money losers. So, if you're making the business decisions at a corporation like that, you're going to go with the gas guzzlers. So this is in the United States, you will do that. This is a Ford Fiesta that's being sold in the UK right now. Seats 5 people, and it gets 74 miles to the gallon. So I rode over here with some lovely gentlemen who have a car that gets between 40 and 45 miles to the gallon, and we were talking about how great that is, and it is great. But there are so many options that we don't have access to. And this is the thing. It's like capitalism, in many ways, it can do a lot. It can lead to a lot of innovation. It can lead to a lot of imagination. But there are things that it can't do. And in this case, it can't bring us cars that get 74 miles to the gallon because they're not profitable enough. And that's a system that's not working. So a system that is working is in Germany. I went to the town of Freiburg, and this is in the southwest part of the country, and it was also winter when I went there, a different winter. And what they're doing is there are 2 eco neighborhoods in Freiburg. One is 10,000 people, and then it's called Rieselfeld, and this is a neighborhood of 5,000 people. It's called Vauban, and there's 15,000 people living in different kinds of methods of constructing these houses. But the most dominant in Vauban is called passive house, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. Passive house architecture uses 1/15 the energy of a conventional house. So I wanted to see what it was like in a place like this. Like how can we live in a way, like I'll say, yes, people say, what do we need to do? We need to consume less. And as soon as you say that, everyone just sort of like gets freaked out. It's like, oh, we have to consume. That means we can't eat things, and we can't go places, and I have to wear ugly clothes, and all this stuff. And I just want to I wanted to see, all right, if I lived this way, what would it be like? So I rented an apartment here and interviewed a lot of people while I was there, interviewed people who live there and architects and people from the city. And, these neighborhoods have been around for over a dozen years. So there's like real, they're like functioning. They're not experiments anymore. They're all multifamily houses. There's no single family houses allowed in Vauban. And that's because it's much more energy efficient and it's much more materials efficient. So this gives you a sense of what it looks like. That was one of the first multifamily passive house structures built in the world, and it was one of the first buildings that was built in Vauban. And Vauban, I wrote about that neighborhood because it was really a product of a community working together to create the kind of place that they wanted to live. It wasn't something that the city decided. It wasn't something, it was very much grassroots. And this is one of the people who was one of the earliest settlers, I guess you could say. His name's Andreas De Lesque, and he is a self-taught electrical engineer. And there's a lot of people like that. They're like self-taught biochemists, and also people who have PhDs in biochemistry and things like that. But it's a very diverse. There's like carpenters and retired grandmothers and college professors and all that. It's a really wide range. And I also wanted to see, like, do you have to be rich to live this way? And this is a mixed income neighborhood. So you don't have to be rich to live there. Granted, it's important to say, Germany is one of the wealthiest countries on the planet, so they can afford those kinds of subsidies. So nevertheless, this I think is a good example of what some of the possibilities are. You can look over his shoulder and there's a farmer's market. They have a farmer's market multiple times a week, and that space behind him is the center, the sort of central square of the neighborhood. And off screen, actually, here's another shot of I have a couple shots of the farmer's market. Yeah, a nice brisk winter day at the farmer's market. So just along the top row above the awning, there's that orange building with all those windows. That's the community center, and it's this like great place where there's like this excellent restaurant, and there's like dance parties and the teen center, and reading groups meet there and all kinds of stuff. And these are things that the community actually had to really fight the city to have. The city wanted to put the central square for the neighborhood in another location, and in fact did that. And the people in the neighborhood were like, we don't go there. This is where we go. We want it here. And they had to really fight with the local officials to make that happen, to get the right zoning and everything. And the city didn't want them to have that community center. Again, they had to fight for it, and they got it. And I'll get into a little bit more of this. It's really like constant engagement. It's not like, okay, we're going to take these 5 steps and then, problem solved. Now we can all like watch TV or whatever. And this is called the Solar Settlement. It's part of a development that's housing, and then there's offices and retail, which you can't see from this angle. But this is an Energy Plus architectural design. So the roofs are all solar panels. These buildings produce more energy than they consume. And they're built using passive house methods and materials. And this is the architect, Rolf Disch, who's a fantastic, really imaginative, creative thinker. And this is inside one of those apartments. So like, okay, what does it look like? What does it feel like? It looks pretty normal. And it doesn't, the place I stayed, it wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't inconvenient. There's all these kind of prejudices that we could have. This is the kitchen. And this is Elsa Gaziel, whose apartment this is. And she brought up this really great point when I was talking to her, which was that, when we pay for a house, when we buy a house, we don't pay the costs of our energy up front if we're using, say, coal-fired energy. You pay that out over the time that you live there. But with a house with, this kind of material, look at the door. It's like this thick. It has 3 panes, 3 triple glazed windows with argon gas in between and all this stuff. And, you do pay up front when you build this kind of structure. So, do you pay essentially over time for the coal power, or do you, there's this kind of barrier to entry to green architecture and other types of environmentally, more environmentally sane options. And so in terms of like some of the shifts that could happen is sort of figuring out how we decide on how things are priced is one thing to think more about. This is the apartment building where I stayed, and this is just the side of it. So you can see the way that this driveway is designed to capture the rainwater run of the stormwater and keep it on site. And then on the right, this blue and green structure is a bike parking lot. So so a big part of this whole thing is the traffic concept, they call it. And okay, so Vauban, just quickly, like the way that Vauban was formed was these activists and environmentalists and artists came together, and they said, we want to make this community. And they went to the city, and it was Vauban is a decommissioned military base. The French left in the early 90s, and the base reverted back to the state, and the state gave it to the city. And these people went to the city and said, we want to turn this into an ecologically sustainable neighborhood. And again, they had to push really, really hard to do this, and they did it. And they had, they planned, they did research and they did planning for like 2 years. They got a huge grant from the German government to do like, full kind of feasibility study, and they wrote this 400-page study with, mapping out what they wanted, mapping out what they wanted to do, the urban planning, the wastewater management, everything, power generation, distributed power is what they use. And so a big part of it was the traffic concept. And the traffic concept is that all of the buildings have to have bicycle parking right out the front door. And so you see there's a lot of bicycles. And the neighborhood is there's like a park every other block, and there's shops, what you need is there. And then if you need to go farther, you can take a car, but you can't park a car in any of the streets. There's one main through street, and that's where the shops are, and visitors can park there, but only for a limited time. If you live there, you can't park a car there. You can park a car at one of 2 garages at either end of the neighborhood, and this is one of them. And if you want to park a car there, you have to really, really want to park a car there, because the spot costs $24,000. So the idea is to make it a pain in the ass to have a car, and to make it really expensive to have a car. And if you have bike lanes and bike parking right out your door, if you have footpaths that are maintained right out your door, you're going to walk or you're going to ride your bike. If you have to walk, 15 minutes to get to your car, you're going to be like, well, I'll just walk, or I'll take my bike, it's easier. The idea is changing what's considered normal.
What about disabled people?
Yeah.
What about, how do they get around?
It depends on their situation, but there's disabled, there's elevators, and all the buildings are accessible. Yeah. And then there's car sharing, and it's a really efficient car sharing network. So the only cars that are allowed to park besides delivery trucks are cars that are part of this car share. So the idea isn't that you don't have things you need, it's that you just use them differently, and you use them more efficiently, and that is how you consume less. And then another thing that they had to work really hard on was getting a mass transit line run out to the neighborhood. And again, they did it, and they got this tram, and it takes 15 minutes to get to the center of the town, to the city center. And, it works. And it's not, the best solution ever, but it's one solution that we can look at and see what some of the possibilities are. And the last day I was there, I went and met with this guy, Carl, I'm forgetting his name, Jorg Lang, and he was really one of the pioneers of Vauban. And we talked for a while, and then he said, I need to go because I have to prepare for a meeting I'm having tomorrow. A group of us are going over to City Hall, and they're having to go over to defend the traffic concept because the city is trying to make them change the parking. They want them to start letting people park their cars on the street. And so, again, this is an ongoing process. So this is sort of what I learned in going through this whole writing and reporting the book. One of the main things I learned is that making these kinds of changes, can't come from products that we buy. It's not something that's going to come from a product that we buy. It's going to come from a process that we engage in and that we continue to engage in. And that means, working as a community. It means understanding how to work with people we don't want to work with, and understanding how to change what we consider as normal and what we consider as the idea of growth, redefining growth, because growth is such a huge part. As soon as you start talking about no growth or slow growth, people freak out in this society. And if we can start to separate out the idea of growth as we know it from development, from maintaining and reinforcing and increasing a good standard of living, then I think that will start to get us more to where we want to go. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you everyone for being here. My name's Helen Scott, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm also on the lecture series board. And we have a good half an hour for discussion, and as Heather said, we wanted this to be a conversation, not just passive question-answer, so people should feel free to make comments and respond to each other. I know there are also a few announcements of activist events that are coming up that people want to make, so you should feel free to do that. But we also have a large room, so please keep your comments short. And Heather will come in, we'll take a few comments and questions, and then Heather will come back a few different times. So who wants to start us off? Do you want to make your announcement?
My name is Jonathan Levitt. I'm one of the community organizers that's been working on the Lockheed campaign. Perhaps some of you know, Heather mentioned it in her speech. It's a really awesome speech. And it kind of carries real social justice torch forward here in Burlington. The city of Burlington, who came out as leaked in the media in late December, is partnering with the world's largest war profiteer, Lockheed Martin. This is a company that builds nuclear weapons, that does detainee interrogation at Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, that lobbies against nuclear weapons treaties. It builds cluster bombs that are illegal in 111 countries, and lobbies actually against climate change regulation on the state level all over the country. So why would we get that with Lockheed Martin? And it comes down to money. There's kind of like what Heather said, there's a lot of really sexy technologies that Mayor Bobkis has decided he really wants to own. And they aren't the best technologies for fighting climate change. He mentioned this. So if you come over to the table or come down to the waterfront tomorrow, we're having a big Earth Day event because the city of Burlington currently forgot it's Earth Day. Community organizers are making it happen anyways. We can help you plug in, find out more information, and really help, as the people of Bovan would say, push back.
Okay. Comments, questions? Question?
First, I've really enjoyed your talk, both the negative and the positive. It's nice to hear that there are positive things going on in the world. I have a big interest in solar energy, and it just seems like so far in the U.S. the options are so limited. And I'm wondering whether in your travels you've seen better solar energy solutions. Because here it's just still so expensive that it always manages to be more than costs of any other fossil fuels or anything else.
Take a couple more before Heather comes back, so don't be shy.
I really like what we sort of started talking about the commodification of green goods, and sort of ended with the answer being in this grassroots sort of push and organizing in such ways to produce a sustainable village and sustainable living. But that they're constantly fighting the city. They're constantly having to justify the organizing they want to be doing and maintaining the kind of city they want to be living in, the neighborhood they want to be living in. And out of this, just make an announcement about a meeting next week, building the socialist alternative in Lafayette 311 from 7 to 8:30 on April 28th to continue the conversation about grassroots organizing in such a way to promote real democracy. We're able to push these ideas that we want, even when the state pushes back.
Thanks. Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about tenants or the basics of passive housing? Because it's the first time I heard about it, and I can imagine what it maybe means, but perhaps you could tell us
Sure.
more about that.
One more? Yeah.
I really just didn't catch it, but when how you were saying in Paraguay, with how we're sending more organic food, how they're clear-cutting more land, why they aren't transitioning to more conservative land, organic maybe I don't know because we're cheaper to do much money, or it just doesn't produce as much and it's too why they aren't.
Can I take one more? Or is it,
Ideally, governments should be responsive to people and do the right thing when it comes to saving the planet and the environment. But somehow the U.S. government, on the federal level, hasn't really taken up that idea. Instead, they're doing what seems to be best for nuclear power companies and coal companies and oil companies. And they're actually giving them big tax breaks and so on. So, but on the local level or in the state level here in Vermont, we may have more of an opportunity than in other states and around the country because there's more of a consciousness here in Vermont about environment, and also we have a state government that's more accessible. So, but I guess one of the things that we've confronted is what do we want them to do? What can we ask our state government to do? What are the demands we should raise? What kind of organization? You know, what we talked about here is people taking it on themselves outside of and in opposition to the government. But really, ideally, we would want our government to be doing that and to making it a program for the state. How do we? So that's the question. What do we want them to do? And then we want to create a social movement to push them to do it.
Still more?
That's probably
Yeah.
So the solar question. So one example is in Germany again. There's this thing called the Feed-In Tariff, which there's some communities in Florida that are experimenting with this. But basically, what happens is it's been a while since I explained this. So say you own a house or an apartment in Germany and you want to put a solar panel on your house. You don't get the government paying 30% of the cost of installing the solar panel. You buy the solar panel, you install it, you hook it up to the grid, and you get paid double the going rate for the electricity that you send into the grid. And you get guaranteed that rate for 12 years. So it's locked in. And that will let you pay off the solar panel within 7 to 8 years, roughly. So you get all those other, the 4 or 5 years, you get, 20 years. It's 20 years. So you get those other, 12 to 13 years of profit from the solar panel. So, that's one way of making it work. There's still that capital outlay that you have to make, but that's another way of organizing it so that in many ways it's less bureaucratic. And the way that it's funded is all the ratepayers in Germany pay about 1 cent, or it's it's 1 euro cent more per kilowatt hour. And so that's what funds it. So that's the solar question. And then passive house architecture, I definitely get into an explanation of it in the book. But basically the idea is you have this really tight envelope on the building, which is the sort of seal of the building, the walls, the windows, the floor and the ceiling. And the best way to do that is to prefabricate the parts of the building and then assemble them on site. Because if you build on site, then you have to deal with the weather, and there's all these ways that you can that the quality of the fit, will start to, can easily deteriorate. And also, there's like I said, these triple glazed windows with argon gas that are really good at capturing sunlight. In a passive house architecture, 40% of the heat is gained from just solar light coming in, and the building being able to hold that heat. Before passive house, the first passive house was built in 1991. It was designed by a guy named Wolfgang Feist in a town, Darmstadt. It's just north of Freiburg, actually. And what used to happen with these kinds of like super efficient buildings was that they were airtight, but then that meant no real circulation, and so there were like mold problems, and it was just not comfortable. And one of the things that passive house, that technology, one of the main components of it is this ventilation system. I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, it's this really amazing ventilation system. It's so simple, but when the air passes out, there's this kind of waffle screen that it goes through, and the air passing out passes through air coming in, and the air coming in absorbs the heat and brings it back into the building. So you maintain 90% of the heat of the building instead of losing it all when the air goes out and bringing in fresh air that's cold, or fresh air that's hot in the summer. So those are some of the main components. The wall, the insulation in the walls is rock wool insulation, and there's these kinds of standards. And another really important component of it is the orientation of the building. So if it's south facing, then you can really get that sunlight. Those are some of the main components of it. ASPA isn't transitioning their conventional cropland because they still sell that sugar, and it's cheaper for them to keep farming it conventionally. And they also make ethanol with the sugar. They can make ethanol with it. So that just gives them much more flexibility in the market. They can either make sugar or they can make ethanol, depending on the price of sugar. And they're the main supplier of Coca-Cola in Paraguay. So there's just an economic incentive for them to keep farming that way. And then what demands do we put forward? You guys should know this. Yeah, I was in a class today and we were talking about this a lot, Bob Bartlett's class. And there's so many things. Some of the things have to do, some of the bigger issues which are very, very difficult politically. I think a lot of the demands that we have are very politically difficult to achieve. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. So, something that would be amazing is campaign finance reform. That would do a hell of a lot. Renovating our trade policies would do a hell of a lot. Obama wants to, he's pledged to increase our trade exports 5-fold. That's one of his big goals. And what that means is increasing industrially produced, industrial farming commodity crops, industrially farmed commodity crops. So if we start to shift that trade policy, there are some people like Fred Kirschman, who was at the Leopold Institute for a long time in Iowa. He says we shouldn't import anything and we shouldn't export anything. He's very hardcore about it, and he explained it to me, and it made sense. I don't know exactly how that would work or what it would actually be like, but there are some really important arguments, because if we didn't have that pressure to export wheat and corn and soy, then we would have a very different set of possibilities here. And then, of course, government regulation. You have to have an honest government if you're going to have effective regulation and true accountability. But those are things that we have to have. So, there's a whole way, there's a whole host of ways to go about cultivating that and maintaining that. And we've talked about earlier today, we talked about other maybe more specific options, but I don't know if you want to say anything, but yeah, okay.
We can take another round of comments and questions. I saw you had your hand up before.
So I really enjoyed your presentation, also hearing about these exciting projects that are going on in Germany and places looking for sustainability. It seems like, though, a recurring theme in your talk was the way that all of these projects continue to butt up against and run in contradiction to the broader system of capitalism that is based on this drive for infinite accumulation and infinite growth, and that this need that we have to change our ideas and change, sustainability, working on sustainability, that these things constantly run into the contradictions within the system of capitalism. And it seems to me like all of these projects are sort of destined to only have marginal impact until we change the way the system on a fundamental level functions. That's sort of my take on it, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are. Do you see sustainability as being ultimately reconcilable and within a broader framework of capitalism, or do you advocate for a fundamentally different system because you do see capitalism as being, the contradictions within that system as being irreconcilable with a drive towards sustainability?
Yeah.
I thought it was really fascinating to hear the detailed explanation of carbon trading and carbon credits. And I've always thought that the whole idea was a little preposterous, but to hear just exactly how ridiculous it is that they're saying, oh, we're keeping this stuff from being burned by burning it. And it's just an incredible hypocrisy there. It's pretty amazing that, especially because if you read that, if you just read that page, even if someone hadn't traveled there, if you just read it closely enough, you would understand, wait a minute, they're burning it for fuel, and through that they're preventing it from being burned. It's just ridiculous.
Yes.
Yeah, is the introduction of ethanol even more damaging to the cropland and to the environment than what's going on with biodiesel now? 10% of our fuel has ethanol in it. I think it's the law. And is that coming from Brazilian sugar crop or where?
Okay. Other side of the room?
Did you upset your client?
No.
I'd be curious what your thought process
Okay.
Well, following up on the two questions about offsets, is there something viable in that concept where we're somehow seeding funds to viable alternative fuel, certain energy, or station? Is there something in the state of that concept that's viable, or is it all really just...
Maybe just
one more.
Heather, I'm wondering what effect the last several months has had on your thinking about green politics and green consumerism. Because it seems like one of the attractions of buying your way to a better world is disillusionment about being able to change the system. And I think as the brother in the front said, whenever we make demands on the government and the corporations, they seem immune to them. So people turn to, I can buy my way to a better world, even if, knowing it's not quite adequate. But in the last several months, we've seen a revolution in Egypt with millions of people overthrowing an authoritarian government. And Cairo, one of the most polluted cities on the planet, is the epicenter of that successful revolt. We've also seen Wisconsin. So what effect do you see this is happening? And then one last quick announcement. For anyone who's interested in 100 meetings like this over a weekend on There's the annual socialism this year, Socialism 2011 conference in Chicago, and I think Heather's been at the last two conferences at least. So it's the 4th of July weekend, and it's a weekend of meetings on things like the end of the one-sided class war, lessons from Wisconsin, revolution in the Middle East from Egypt to Bahrain, combating resistant Zionism, abortion without apology, the case for a new movement, human nature will vary. A bunch of us I see around here have been or are going to the conference this year. So if you're interested, there should be a flyer on your chair or come and talk to me afterwards.
Thanks. I'm going to let Heather come back, and then I'll take one more round.
Okay, so first of all, we need to settle this. I am a hardcore capitalist. Just making sure you know that. So yeah, I mean, capitalism, the reason that we're even having this conversation is that capitalism can't make the changes that need to, it doesn't allow for the kinds of changes that we need to happen. That's an indication that it doesn't work. If there's things we know how to do and we have the science, we know what's wrong, we have the science, we have the technology we need, there's no doubt that it can be improved, but we have the technology now. And the only reason we're not using it is because it's not profitable enough, essentially. It doesn't fit within the capitalist framework in a way that, benefits capital the most. And so that's a really crucial part of this whole discussion. And that's going to cost you $10. He said offset it. Okay, the ethanol question, so the impacts, who asked that question? Okay, so the impacts, the ethanol production, so two kinds of biofuels, ethanol and biodiesel. Ethanol is alcohol-based. It replaces gasoline. It's made from crops like corn and sugarcane. And then there's biodiesel, which is oil-based. It replaces diesel, and it's made from crops like palm oil and soybeans and canola. And ethanol is the #1 biofuel used in the United States. And about 10% of all gasoline in the country contains, about 80% of all the gasoline in the country contains 10% of ethanol. And that amount is set to increase. The government has said it's okay to increase that to 15%. And then of course there are vehicles that can run on 85% ethanol. The impacts of it are, they're big. I mean, on a number of levels. I mean, they reinforce industrial farming. There's been a huge expansion of monoculture corn farming because demand for corn has shot up. Another thing that happens, everything that comes from that, greater use of GMO corn, BT corn, greater use of fertilizers, monocrop. Even further, and all of this is very heavily subsidized. Even further depletion of biodiversity. There was land that was in conservation that's now been pulled out of conservation because it's more profitable for farmers to go ahead and farm it than to get the conservation payments under the Farm Bill. And what little rotations were happening now in many places are not happening. It's just corn, as they say, corn on corn, season after season. And then there are the effects on the local level whereby ethanol has this increased. The price of corn is now directly linked to the price of oil. So when the price of oil goes up, the price of corn goes up. This wasn't the case before. So we're dealing with a different kind of, we have the price of corn as food, then we have the price of corn that's being the speculators, inflation of the price of corn, and then now it's linked to oil as well. So the impacts on the local level are that the price of farmland has gone through the ceiling. So it's really hard. It was already hard for new farmers to get into farming, and now it's even harder. yeah, I mean, those are just some of the, and then just quickly on the subsidy tip, in 2007, the U.S. government spent 2 out of every $3 that were allocated for renewable energy. 2 out of every $3 went to corn ethanol. $1, that other remaining dollar went to wind, solar, geothermal, all other renewable energies combined got that one other dollar. And corn ethanol got, no, it didn't. I mean, it was weird how it happened. I don't know. And then offsets. So I did not offset my emissions from my flight. All the traveling I did not offset my emissions. I calculated my emissions with all the traveling I did with the book, and my emissions doubled with the traveling I did. I didn't offset my emissions because I don't believe that if I pay that money, that my emissions will actually be offset. And I also don't, from what I've learned, I don't believe that you can actually offset. Carbon that's emitted today, I mean, basically the only way that you can reduce carbon is to reduce carbon, And then you asked if there's something sort of salvageable from these projects. And, in some ways, some projects are doing things that are, could be considered better. There are interesting things going on. Another project that I write about in the book is a micro-solar company called Celco. And it's in India, and they distribute small solar panels to peasant villages and just rural villages. And but the thing is, it's like micro lending. So these people have to take out loans, and they have to buy the solar panels. They don't get them for free, and so they have to deal with that debt. So that's one issue. The other issue is one of the villages. Celco wouldn't tell me where their villages are. So I had to go with a representative from the company. I had to go with him, and then he sat with me in all my interviews, and they would only take me to one place. So it was really frustrating. And he told me, his boss actually told me, there's all these questions that you can't ask. You can't ask personal questions. You can't ask questions about their finances. You can't ask questions, all this stuff. And so the guy that she sent me with was, he was kind of young, and he was very sweet. And I just asked my questions anyway. And he was like, can you not do that? And I was like, I'll be fine. But what I found was that the people that have the solar panels in that village are people that are they're squatters that have little shops that they've squatted on the main road, along the main road. So they're not supposed to be there, and they can't hook up to the electricity grid. So the town actually has electricity. And what I imagined and what I wanted to see was like a town that didn't have electricity, that was getting electricity because the solar project came in. And the solar panels are small, and they light 2 bulbs, and it's a 20-watt. It's not at the tip of my tongue, but it's not very powerful solar panel. But what happens is that because it's not that powerful, and it's not more powerful because these people can't afford to buy bigger panels, is that the quality of the light is really crappy. And so they don't use it if they don't have to. What ends up happening is that people use it. There's in these shops, they'll use it. But a couple people in the village had them in their homes. They don't use them unless the electricity gets cut, which happens. Every day it happens at some point. And so they'll use them as essentially a backup system. It hasn't gotten them off the grid, And so there's that. It's just, again, this kind of like haphazard, way of creating renewable energy. I mean, there's no way that can be any kind of infrastructure, So that's frustrating. And I think that, if we want to do these kinds of projects, let's just do them. Why do, by tethering it to this, by linking it with this idea of carbon offsetting, what you're doing is you're commodifying pollution. And I just think it's better if we don't do that. And if we want to, if people want to do these development, type projects, there's other issues with that, but I think we need to really separate the two. I think that was the last of those. Yeah, maybe just a short.
Yeah, just a short one. We were going to finish at 8:30, but there are a few hands, so we'll just take one short round, and then Heather can finish up. Yeah.
Struck by something that hasn't come up, which is what I would call outsourcing as a problem in developing countries. It seems to be a really big theme that we haven't discussed very much. And what I mean, I could go on about that for hours, but I'm trying to get a sense from like the percentages of problem. You talk about deforestation and the oil palm problem. I mean, I've personally been there. I've seen that had absolutely nothing to do with the greening of the economy. I mean, that problem, there's tons of biological information to show that the kleptocracy in Indonesia, for example, has caused that kind of deforestation for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
So I just thought it would be good if you could put in perspective where the green economy, percentage-wise, is causing a problem in the places that you look to just, I mean, deforestation isn't solely being caused by the green economy, and I think a little bit of what you said would lead people to believe that. And so I want to know, like, okay, let's get some perspective on this. How much of a problem is this, and how much can there be in terms of self-empowerment at the local level, which I think is a key point that you maybe haven't hit on enough yet, to help people to come up with solutions, particularly in the South, to begin to come up with more sustainable solutions for themselves, as opposed to just being outsourced farms for our green solutions, which is really what you've shown.
Yeah.
There were some other hands over here at the back.
There was the discussion earlier on Borneo where the people are burning agro waste, and they were burning agro waste, and now they have to go out and purchase it, whereas before it was local. And I was thinking about either way, it's still a personal exposure for those people cooking. That as long as they're using combustion fuels for cooking, they have their own. Both for largely to women and young children are having combustion-based exposures to pollution, and that affects communities as well. And in the United States, when I've seen multifamily housing, again you have personal and community exposures to barbecue grills, and pesticides. One person using a dryer sheet in their laundry will pollute the neighborhood for miles. And I really didn't see those sorts of problems in Europe in multifamily housing as I did in the United States. So there are definitely a lot of other things going on that there aren't necessarily one-step solutions. So, for instance, back on the problem with Borneo, people using combustion-based fuels, they still need an alternative. And I was glad for the example on the solar furnaces, the solar water heaters, solar cookers as a good alternative. There was also the discussion on the Ford cars, and that's another example where we still need to find an alternative that doesn't use combustion-based fuels.
Thanks. Yeah.
Heather, would you address geothermal, or do you address it in your book, and are you seeing people in Europe using it? You don't see much in Vermont, but my neighbor in Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't know where to go. Yeah, middle.
Yeah. So it seems to me one of the big problems of consumerism is consumers, and another word for consumers is humans. And so I'm kind of wondering what your thoughts might be, or what you may have discovered in your research regarding. We haven't talked about the role of population growth in the whole equation, and so maybe at the macro level, perhaps any kind of ideas you have about how the commodification of, or sort of the romanticization of having children and families and all that, how that might relate to like corporate interests. And then maybe on the micro level, even within the green community, I don't think there's necessarily like a lot of standards we like to kind of encourage about population growth in our own communities.
Okay, great. So I'm sorry that there were still hands, but in the interest of time, I think we should leave it there and just let Heather answer those really small questions. In conclusion, good luck.
The answers are yes, yes, and no. Geothermal, I'm sorry, I don't know, but I think it's great. So tell me what you find out. And then in terms of putting this stuff in perspective, you know, the fact of the matter is that, like, the stuff that I'm talking about isn't happening. You know, I mean, deforestation for biofuels that's not the main driver of deforestation in Indonesia. The main driver, it's just that it's growing so quickly. The main driver for deforestation in Indonesia is palm oil plantations, but most of that palm oil, it goes into food, into processed food. It's vegetable oil. So when you buy, like, vegetable oil in the grocery store, it just says vegetable oil, you know, often it would be oil from Indonesia, and it would be palm oil, and it's used in all kinds of crackers and cookies and candy bars. So that's, you know, it is important to put that in perspective. What I'm focusing on is, you know, what are the impacts of these specific green things, you know, that could seem very environmentally responsible, but actually, you know, there's this other part of the picture, and the point isn't to say, you know, nothing works. You know, the point is to say, you know, like I said at the beginning of the talk, there's a difference between real hope, false solutions and real solutions, and then there's a difference between real hope and false hope. And if, you know, if we can figure out what is actually working, and you know, of course, there's tremendous destruction going on, and mining and deforestation and you know, all kinds of water pollution that aren't caused by green, you know, products and processes. But this is, you know, I focus on this because this is supposed to be the answer to that. And in terms of what, you know, things that can happen on the local level, I mean, does that answer your question?
Oh, I just thought it would be great to put it in perspective.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise people could draw a conclusion that might be...
Yeah. I think it's I think it's a good point. And you know, something that people often say after I'll do a talk, they'll say, like, you know, oh, so this doesn't work, then that means nothing's going to work, you know? And I don't know if that's what you meant, but that happens.
For the bigger picture of all the, you know, what percentage of problems this is really
Right.
at this point, and then what can be done.
Right, right. But so, I mean, so often people will say that to me, like, okay, well, this doesn't work, like, you know, forget it. And my response to that is, you know, there aren't only two options. There's, like, a lot of other options. And so if we can, you know, pull back and see how many other possibilities there are, you know, then we can start to make some real progress. And, you know, on the local level, you know, there's so many things that can happen. And when you have the stuff I saw in Vauban, you know, there's this issue of, okay, like, doing all these things kind of individually, how do you connect those things up? And that's, you know, that needs to happen on a local, you know, regional, and eventually, you know, larger level, because it's all connected. But those, you know, just, this is a little bit of an abstract answer, but you know, I think those kinds of making those kinds of connections with each other, and then going from there is really important. And you know, really inspiring stuff happens with that. Like the stuff I saw in Vauban, I mean, there were technologies that I came across that were just, like, you know, so cool. And, you know, people, I mean, these architects were just doing amazing work and using really fascinating materials. And this stuff can be really exciting and inspiring. And then population. So my take on population is, I mean, there's a lot of, I think, you know, you said that people on the left often won't get into it. Is that what you said?
Well, I just think within our own, let's call it the green community, there's maybe not necessarily much in the way of personal discussion about it, and maybe kind of exploring on a personal level what each of us ought, or maybe I don't want to use the word like ought, but it's because obviously it's a very sensitive decision for people, but there's not a lot of discussion about what that really means if we're all kind of making these decisions without some sort of framework.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you might be talking about it in a slightly different way than what I'm going to say, but we'll see. Which is that, you know, when people start talking about population, so often it means it's in some ways a code. It can often be racist, you know. And from what I've learned over the course of writing the books I've written and the articles I've written is that, you know, it's not, you know, and the reason it can be racist is that, you know, people in developing countries, people of color, have so many more children than white educated Westerners, and so those extra people are using up more of the planet's resources. Well, actually, they're not. You know, if you have 100 million more Americans, it's going to have a totally different impact than if you have 100 million more Nigerians. And so the question isn't the number of people, and when you focus on the issue of population, what you're saying is the fact that we consume is a problem. And what I think is really important is how we consume. We're human beings, we're going to consume. So how do we consume? And that lets us open the discussion up more and look at, like, what kind of economic system works? What kind of political, social, economic frameworks can we use so that we can have mass transit, so that we can have, you know, if we need to have vehicles, we have vehicles that get, you know, 74 miles to the gallon, so that if we want, you know, if we want to use the farmland in Iowa to grow something besides monoculture BT corn, we can do that, you know. So I think that by getting into the question of population, if we can open that discussion up rather than, I feel like it just so often gets shut down, I think that will get us to a more generative place. No pun intended. All right, thanks a lot, you guys.